Have you ever wanted someone so much, it started to hurt? Not in the body, but somewhere deeper where touch cannot reach. As if that desire revealed not just the absence of the other, but the absence of something within. An ancient, forgotten absence. Perhaps not even yours, yet one you carry as if it were. In that instant, desire ceases to be an impulse and becomes language. The language of a soul trying to return to itself, searching for shortcuts in the body of another. Jung did not see libido as carnal desire. To him, it was a life force, a psychic energy pushing us toward wholeness. To desire, in this sense, is to seek what's missing, not in another, but in ourselves. It's the unconscious calling, whispering that parts of us lie dormant, and may only awaken when a face, a scent, a touch triggers the memory of what we once were and forgot. Sometimes, what you call lust is just longing disguised as courage. Sometimes what you feel isn't attraction, it's sodad, not for the other but for yourself, for the part of you that once allowed itself to feel, to desire, to live, without fear, censorship, or guilt. And that's why desire aches, because it reminds you, it exposes you, it shows you the void within, not for the other to fill but to illuminate. Perhaps desire is this, a mirror, not to see the other, but to see yourself through it. When desire lingers, when it returns without reason, perhaps it's not about the other. Perhaps it's the body trying to speak what the mind isn't yet ready to hear. There's a silent wisdom in sensations that arise without explanation, a wisdom taught not in words, but in wounds. The attraction you feel may be more than chemistry. It may be a symbol, a coded message from the unconscious, sent through skin, heat, urgency, not because the other is the answer, but because they ignite an ancient memory, a summons to return to what was forgotten. And this call, when unheeded, becomes a prison. Desire turns to compulsion. The search becomes an escape. The body, once a temple, becomes a battleground. Jung said what isn't integrated becomes shadow, and the shadow doesn't vanish. It disguises itself, sometimes as obsession, sometimes as shame, sometimes as a desire so intense it seems to come from outside, when really it's born from what you repressed within. Maybe the body isn't the problem. Maybe it's just trying to be a bridge between forgotten emotion and a consciousness still refusing to feel, because the body doesn't lie. And when it speaks through desire, perhaps it isn't asking for pleasure, but begging for reconnection with what you were once forced to silence. Some desires aren't born of pleasure, but of absence, of the touch you lacked, the affection that never came, the gaze you once hungered for and never found. In these moments, the body pulses not from wanting, but from lack, and what seems like lust is longing dressed as strength. Jung said, what isn't brought to consciousness returns as fate, and perhaps that's why some encounters feel so intense, because they're not just meetings, they're reunions with parts of yourself you'd forgotten or never dared to love. The other becomes a stage, and you, without realizing, perform, trying to convince them you're worthy, when really you're trying to convince yourself. You don't just miss the other's presence, you miss when you still believed you could be touched without fear, seen without hiding, wanted without effort. In these cases, desire doesn't seek pleasure, it seeks confirmation. It longs to hear, even in silence, you are enough. But no matter how often the other says it, it's never enough, because the void isn't outside. It's where no one can touch, where only you can enter. And perhaps the question isn't who will love me, but what part of myself did I lose, and still expect the other to return? Until that answer comes from within, every desire risks being just another echo of a love that was never whole. What you feel isn't always love. Sometimes it's memory, sometimes projection. You don't desire the other for who they are, but for what they represent, for what they awaken, for what they remind you is still missing. The fascination isn't born from their presence, but from the absence they trigger in you. Jung called this the projection of the anima and animus, internal archetypes, images of the masculine and feminine within, shaping how we connect. When someone attracts you intensely, often you're not seeing them. You're seeing your soul trying to return to wholeness, to internal reconciliation. That's why love sometimes hurts so much. Because you glimpse yourself and then lose it. Because you reconnect and then collapse. She no longer knew who she was until the other left. When enchantment shatters, the void returns. But with it comes a rare chance to know yourself beyond idealization, to walk the path of individuation, not seeking perfection, but embracing what's real. The end of enchantment isn't the end of love. It's the start of true love, the kind that doesn't seek completion in another, but truth in oneself. That no longer needs to project, because it's finally learned to see. Some touches aren't just physical, they're memories. Some desires don't come from the body, they come from the soul trying to reveal itself. Jung didn't see sex as moral or mechanical, but as symbolic language, where the unconscious speaks without words. Every carnal encounter, beyond pleasure, carries the possibility of spiritual reunion, or of an escape disguised as connection. Pleasure can be revelation, or noise. It depends on the silence that precedes it. When the body screams and the soul silences, pleasure becomes anesthesia. But when there's presence, real, embodied, felt, touch becomes a portal, a place where wounds don't hide, but meet, where desire stops being lack and starts being ritual. Breathe before touching, feel before surrendering. Let will meet truth, because healing desire doesn't come from haste. It's born in the space between impulse and listening. There the unconscious speaks, not as chaos but as message. Perhaps sex was never just about two bodies. Perhaps it's always been an attempt to unite what was split. And when done with awareness, pleasure stops being escape and becomes passage. A passage inward, to yourself, to the other, to the mystery between. When libido finds no true expression, it doesn't vanish. It accumulates, circling the psyche, seeking exits where it only finds locked doors. Then, desire becomes anxiety. The life impulse turns to nameless restlessness, a agitation that seems mental, but is spiritual, a tension born not from present urgency, but from refusing to hear what's been screaming for so long. The body feels, the heart races without reason, the mind floods with restless thoughts, and beneath it all, the soul just wants to come home. Jung saw sexual energy as creative force, not limited to the physical. When denied, it morphs into irritation, sadness, confusion, into compulsive searches for quick relief, as if every distraction could erase the touch that never truly came. Emotional neuroscience names this, but the soul doesn't need labels. It needs listening, space, reconnection, because often, anxiety is just piled up desire. Desire unacknowledged, unfelt, unlived. Desire that longed to be a bridge, but became a cage. And when that cage suffocates, perhaps it's time to return to the body, not to control it, but to inhabit it with presence. 3 deep breaths, 3 moments of silence, and there, in the chaos, something may settle, not because it's solved, but because it's finally felt. Love born of fantasy and chance, but love lived with open eyes terrifies, because it reveals, not the other, but you, the projections you cast, the voids you stuffed, the fears you ignored. Magical love seduces because it promises healing without wounding, wholeness without conflict, presence without exposure. But that love exists only in imagination, and so, it always disappoints. You're not disappointed by the person, but by the image you created to feel safe. Jung said, true love doesn't fill, it reveals. It comes not to complete you, but to show what you've yet to integrate. And that revelation hurts, because secretly, you wanted salvation and found a mirror. Yet in that mirror, real love begins. Not the kind that vows to end your loneliness, but that honors it. That walks with you without erasing your shadows. That holds your flaws without fixing them. The love that doesn't disappoint isn't what meets your expectations. It's what remains when they crumble. Perhaps the question isn't, does he love me? But am I here because I want to be, or because I can't bear to be alone? Because to love isn't to seek a savior. It's to choose someone to keep finding yourself with, even if sometimes it means getting lost first. Some pleasures liberate, others imprison. Often the difference lies not in the act, but in the awareness accompanying it. Healing pleasure doesn't apologize. It doesn't stem from needing acceptance or fearing rejection. It doesn't demand explanation. It simply exists. Because the body, when respected as the soul's extension, knows where to touch and when to stop. Sex was never the villain. The silence around it made it a battleground. Desire, repressed by centuries of guilt, fear, and distortion, learned to hide, to manifest as shame, compulsion, fragmentation, but the soul longs to live its embodied truth, as Clarissa Pinkola Estes said, and the body, on this path, isn't an obstacle, it's an oracle. It speaks what the mouth dares not. It asks what the heart hasn't yet dared to feel. Pleasure born of presence is fire that warms, not burns. A space of reunion, not with the other, but with yourself. Because to feel pleasure isn't to lose yourself. It's often the only way to remember that you're still here, that you still pulse, that you're still alive, and perhaps in the end, that's the cure. Not to understand pleasure, but to inhabit it with reverence, without fear, without rush, without begging permission to exist. Not every encounter is salvation. Sometimes the other arrives not to rescue you, but to reveal you, like a mirror reflecting what you've refused to see. Jung said the task isn't to seek love, but to remove the barriers to it. And perhaps the greatest barrier is the illusion that someone else can fill what you abandoned. You think you're surrendering, but you're asking for yourself. In every touch, every gesture, what pulses isn't just desire, it's hope. The hope that being seen will make you feel real. But no one can give you what you haven't yet accepted. The other doesn't hold the key to your wholeness. At best, they have the courage to show you where you dropped it. The right touch can heal or hide. It can ignite your truth or deepen your escape. That's why before surrender, silence is needed. Not the silence that withdraws, but the kind that listens, that asks gently, am I offering myself or asking for myself? Because the other isn't the destination, they're the passage, a portal to meeting yourself again and again, until one day the meeting isn't a search, but an overflowing from one who no longer needs to flee. There comes a moment after so much seeking when the question changes, from who will want me to who am I when I'm not trying to be loved? In that instant, desire sheds its masks. It's no longer lack, proof, or promise, just a call, an invitation from the soul to return home. And in truth, true desire doesn't beg, it invites. It doesn't demand explanations. It's born where presence lives, where inner silence needn't be filled, but felt. Because when desire springs from the meeting of body, soul, and spirit, it becomes a bridge, not an escape, not a cage, a passage. You never wanted just sex. What you craved, perhaps unknowingly, was the world's silence shouting for once, you are whole. And that wholeness doesn't depend on another. It begins when you stop searching outside for what can only be remembered within. The other may be the path, but the destination was always you.